Hi, my name is Adam Poe, and this is Flying into the Future. So, for this research ethical issue in aviation, I wanted to research how much trust should be given to computers and automation. Um, I wanted to discuss and find out whether or not new technologies have affected aviation in a positive or in a negative way. Um, I wanted to look at whether or not it increases human factor risks or decreases human factor risks. Um, So, but why is this topic important? Aviation technology continues to improve all the time. There's so many new technologies coming out, especially with the planes I fly. New avionics systems coming in, and recently, I think at the past Oshkosh a couple days ago, they had a aircraft autonomously land by itself, like just by itself, no human inputs. So really cool stuff, but definitely something that should be questioned. Like, should we give this much trust to computers? Um, the second thing is this issue affects both pilots and passengers. So pilots like myself, we're really interested in this issue because if 20 years down the line, it's all AI flying the airliners, we don't have a job. So this is definitely a topic that we need to consider. And then also for passengers, would you want to ride on an aircraft that's um, completely autonomous and there's no human pilots flying the aircraft? Just something to consider. And then the last thing is it questions if automation increases or reduces human factor risk. So it's pretty commonly known that about 80% of aviation accidents are due to some sort of human factors. And although technology seems to improve those human factor risks, it might also introduce some other human factor risks, which doesn't really help. So this is why I really wanted to research this issue. In terms of the literature review, I looked at about 10 different sources from authors of a variety of backgrounds, medical backgrounds, safety backgrounds, navigational backgrounds, just to get their thoughts on automation. And what it seems to have that they have found is that they tend to agree that new advancements have improved safety and also have quite a bit of benefits. They found that, especially in Brown's study, that it reduces pilots' workload and improves situational awareness. So, right, if a pilot's trying to work on one thing, automation can take care of another thing while he's focusing on the more important task. It also improves aviation safety and lowers accident rates, right? If the pilot's focusing on one thing instead of 10 different things that can be taken care of with a computer, he can more effectively manage an emergency, which in turn can reduce accidents. And then Oching's study, automation improves navigational integrity. Right, the GPS systems, the WAS systems, the RAIN, all this new technology has really helped navigation. It used to be that everything was all radio systems or VORs, and so pilots would have to fly to each VOR station. Now, with the accuracy of GPS, they're able to navigate more accurately. They get lost a lot fewer times, and it's much more efficient. And then lastly, automation provides consistent results. The computer's going to respond to how it was programmed, and every time it doesn't change. It doesn't have an option to. So this can be better for emergency management. If it has an engine failure, it knows exactly how to respond and responds the same way every time. Whereas humans, we might get caught up in the heat of the moment and make mistakes. And then going to the disadvantages of automation, one of the problems is automation bias and over dependence. This is where the pilots trust their automation, their systems, their technology way too much. If the autopilot tells the plane to descend too early, the pilots might tend to trust the system and be like, oh, well, it's technology, it's smart, it knows what to do. Where in reality, it could be driving them straight into a mountain or something. And then also manual flying skill degradation. If you let automation do all the flying for you and you never actually get your hands on the yoke at all, you're going to lose your flying skills. And so what happens if the automation fails? Are you going to be able to take over? Maybe, maybe not. It's just up if are you proficient in your skill? Are you even, yeah, I mean, it's definitely an issue. Third, automation isn't coded for every scenario. In my opinion, I think this is something adults should looked at, but every emergency is different. It might be similar in that, oh, an engine failed, but also you have other things to consider, like fuel. How much fuel do you have on board? What's the weather conditions? And so that's one of the problems with automation, is it only knows how to respond in a certain amount of ways. Whereas humans, they're trying to be critical thinkers. That's something I learned in this class, is how to critically think and take all available information and make the best decision out of it. And then the last disadvantage of automation is the loss of situational awareness and engagement. So this goes back to automation bias. When the pilot relies too much on the technology, they tend to like not care, especially in like cruise. This is Kelly and Ethmio in their controlled flight into terrain study. They found that a lot of accidents started like in the cruise, just from pilots not monitoring their systems, just because they're not worried. Autopilot's taking over. There's not a huge task load, and so they lose their situational awareness, and they're not really engaged. I believe it was Dolcher also came up with a idea of bringing an app to the cruise portion of the flight, where pilots can go over flashcards, just keeping their memories stable or up to date, and so they can always stay engaged. That way, if something happens, they'll be ready to respond. But ultimately, researchers agree that while automation has a purpose, it can pose greater risk if the pilots are over-reliant and fail to understand its limitations. The only problem with these studies is time. That's something I found on the study on whether or not like people would be willing to fly in an autonomous aircraft. It was really an age, gender. Some people were more open to flying on autonomous planes than others. But this is bound by time. Like, right, if 20 years down the line, everything is automated, they're going to be more likely to want to fly. And so all these studies are also bound by time. Like, all this technology is improving by the day, and their answers might change. This information might change. Safety is getting better, might be getting worse. But so time is it's pretty much a constraint on this on these studies. When we go into the pros and cons of pilotless aircraft, there's quite a few positives, also quite a few negatives. In terms of the positive, computers don't get fatigued or distracted. They don't have to use the bathroom, right? There's so much less human factor issues that you wouldn't have to deal with if you had pilotless aircraft. You won't have pilots falling asleep on the job. You won't have pilots showing up drunk. So just all these different issues you wouldn't have, which is nice. The second one is that the computer decisions become standardized. We talked about this earlier. For every action, there's always a set response. And this can be beneficial in a high-intensity moment where humans might make mistakes. The third positive is it reduces airline operating costs, right? You don't have to pay a computer a salary. You don't have to make sure that the pilot shows up on time. They're always there. It always is the same. You're not worried about how much rest they got. It's a bunch of different things that they don't have to worry about anymore by taking the pilots out of the aircraft. The last positive is it could reduce human factor risk. This is kind of like the overall summary of Dolcher's 2007 study. And then going over to the negatives, not every emergency is accounted for. Um, so if, I mean, we also talked about this earlier, but if I don't know, a aileron fails, you can't move it. Does the plane know how to respond? Maybe, but also what happens if you lose your electrical at the same time, but also are 100 miles from the closest airport, or all these different things. What if you're over the ocean? What if the weather's really bad? Um, there's only so much that computers can account for and can be programmed for. The computer's only as good as it's programmed, and this kind of reflects on the programmer. So whatever they input into it, it knows how to respond that way, but it can't account for every sort of emergency. It's good, but it's not enough. And the second negative is it's more susceptible to cybersecurity issues. This one's not really talked about enough. The We had hijackings not too long ago that still happen in some areas, but cybersecurity is definitely an issue. If you have pilotless aircraft, if there's some passenger in the back working on his computer, might be able to hack into the system, take over it. This could be a really big issue, especially because, I mean, it's a flying missile if you can control it. And so that's definitely a negative of it. You would have to find ways to completely proof it from hackers. And I don't know if the public trust is there that it is enough to stop it. And this brings me to the last negative, is that the public lacks trust in automation. Everyone I've talked to, friends, family, other pilots, people that fly very often, they wouldn't trust if there wasn't a pilot on the flight deck. And so this can be a serious issue, and also it take a lot of time. So maybe once they see that automation works for a while and they trust that it's not going to be hacked or anything, then, and they see proving consistent results, that trust might improve. But as of right now, there is a very big lack in trust especially for commercial operations. So this brings me to the future of aviation. So what is it looking like in the short term and the long term? In the short term, I think AI use will really, really increase. This can help with flight planning, go, no-go decisions. Pilots can use this to be able to get weather reports. I think AI will be able to give them, kind of like a co-pilot does, just give them information while flying, and so that they can make the best decision based on the information presented. Pilots will also learn to manage more advanced aircraft systems in the short term. So, especially with K-State, we switched the entire fleet over to G1000 aircraft with autopilot and whatnot. So they want us to know how to manage the systems, know how to adjust if something goes wrong. But instead of flying steam gauges and focusing on the manual flying, they also want us to learn how to manage these complex systems. So this is how we can work with automation to ensure the safety of flight. The third thing on the future in the short term is navigation will become almost entirely GPS. There's becoming less and less of a need for VORs and any sort of non-satellite based navigation. So this is something that can be seen in the future for aviation technology. And in the long term, I think autonomous flight could be possible. Cargo flights will be the first to experience this. There's no human problems if it crashes. There won't be a loss of human life unless it hits something below. But that will probably be the first. Cargo companies will be the first to trust automation with their packages and whatnot. And then also FAA regulations will heavily influence how much this develops. Right, in most airliners it's required to have 2 pilots on the flight deck. So will the FAA ease up on this to allow development of autonomous flight? That's to be determined. And going down to my personal opinion, I think that aviation technology should focus on aiding pilots rather than replacing them. This course taught me a lot about diversity of skills. So we can take what I know best and what the computer knows best, and we can work together to have the best flight and most safe flight. Second, pilots should always be open to learning and improving their skill and not over-relying on technology. This is definitely something that pilots have to stay proficient in. They should always be hitting the sims. They should always be learn to fly the plane if something bad goes happen. They should always stay engaged, always monitoring their systems. And then lastly, I don't think computers will ever be able to replicate the decision-making skills of an experienced pilot. There's pilots that have thousands of hours, and if something just doesn't feel right to them, they will know it. And computers, they don't really have this critical thinking skill, and why not make the best decision that will ensure safety? And in conclusion, as aviation technology advances, the goal must always be to determine how much responsibility the human and the computer receive in order to properly ensure the safety of flight. And in the end, the goal is safety. And so how can we do this as both humans and computers develop what is the best for the safety of aviation, and how can we do this ethically? But the question always remains, how much trust should be given to technology and possibly automation? I'd like to thank you for your time. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your summer. Thanks.